For those of you who may be here for the first time, Meridian is an independent nonprofit that advances U.S. leadership through diplomacy. This program is part of our Center for Diplomatic Engagement, which serves as an educational and networking hub for the Foreign Diplomatic Corps here in Washington. We serve as a window into U.S. domestic and international policy making. This program is part of our Space Diplomacy Initiative, which we launched back in the spring, and it's focused on advancing international governance norms, maintaining U.S. leadership, democratizing space for nascent and emerging spacefaring nations, which in particular is the focus of today's program, as well as accelerating the global space economy. And what we do really boils down to three areas. First, we're focused on fostering as many partnerships between the United States and other countries as possible. These are government-to-government, B2B, but also public-private partnerships. The second goal is to help diplomats understand space, both American and international diplomats, with a focus on those, not necessarily like those who will be here today, that their whole portfolio focuses on space, but those who are learning, those whose countries are not quite sure what their path is quite yet. On the flip side, we're also focused on helping scientists and space economy leaders better understand international affairs, better understand geopolitics and things to that nature. We do this through trainings, as well as professional exchanges that bring the space sector leaders from other countries to the U.S., both here in Washington and around the country, to engage with their peers and to uncover opportunities for partnerships. We also host lots of meetings like this here in Washington and elsewhere. Our next program is going to be around satellite in March, and we're going to be focusing on advancing the commercial space industry worldwide. We are looking for partners and sponsors for that program. So if you have satellite companies that may be coming to town for satellite and are looking to make their mark, please let us know. All right, so I have some housekeeping items I've been asked to share. The first is that this program is on the record. I know we had some journalists RSVP, so I wanted to make note of that. Also, for those of you diplomats who are here that may have had a driver, just a reminder that we are in a residential area, and we want to be respectful of our neighbors. If you do have a driver, and your driver is not already parked in our parking lot, which is right past the houses here, we ask that you just text them or give them a call and ask them to go park over there. Idling isn't permitted, and we don't want any of our staff members to be getting calls from the neighbors today. Today's agenda, you can see the full agenda in your booklets. We're going to have two panels, one with members of the Diplomatic Corps and the international space programs, and a second one with the commercial sector. But first, we are going to hear from our partners. Very pleased to team up with the Secure World Foundation. I'm sure most, if not all of you here know that they are a global leader in advancing space sustainability. And today, we're excited to talk more about the second edition of the Handbook for New Actors in Space. As someone who's also relatively new to the space industry, I've been digging into that handbook and learning as well. But excited to welcome Crystal Azelton, the Senior Director of Program Planning at Secure World Foundation, to kick us off.
All right. Well, thank you, Frank, for that introduction. And thank you to everybody for coming. As Frank said, I see a lot of familiar faces, but I'm also happy to hear that we are able to reach out to a new audience as well. So I'm Crystal Azelton. I'm the Senior Director of Program Planning at the Secure World Foundation. And the Secure World Foundation, as Frank said, we focus on space sustainability. That's our bread and butter. It has been for 20 years, long before that was a catchword that everybody uses. And what that means for us, because we often get asked to define it, is that we want to promote a space environment and space activities that happen in a safe, secure, peaceful, and sustainable, i.e. we can continue to do them for the long term. And we do that because of the benefits on Earth. And I think that's particularly important for this audience. When we're talking about why a country might be interested in developing a space program or expanding its space program, you have to look at the benefits. Space is cool. Many of us are in this industry because we think it's fun or interesting, but that's not a justification for an expanding commercial entity who needs to make money. That's not a justification for a company, or sorry, for a country who's looking to do that, or perhaps develop a CubeSat program for its university students, et cetera. And so this handbook So that's what Secure World does. There you go. And our handbook for new actors in space was actually conceived around about 10 years ago, give or take a little bit of time. And it was really kind of an observation that the space world was expanding. Didn't take a rocket scientist to realize that commercial space was growing, that more and more universities were getting involved in space, that more and more non-space companies were developing a space arm, that more and more countries were trying to figure out what role space played in their country's goals. And so we put together this handbook with the idea that if you're a new actor, like you're from a totally different industry and you suddenly enter this industry, you need to understand the policies. What is sustainability in that context? What are the things you might need to know? Like you're not a space lawyer, but it's kind of helpful to understand certain aspects of that. If you're developing a space program in a country, what do regulatory and oversight look like as you do that? And so it's meant to be a very broad primer. This is not going to tell your space company how to get a license in X country. It's not going to say your remote sensing law should look exactly like this. It's meant to be a broad overview for people who are either entering the industry or who are shifting over. Like say you were an engineer and all of a sudden you're part of a company that's expanding and you need to understand the broader context in order to manage that. So that was what was designed. It came out in early 2017. I don't want to make anyone laugh, but we originally published a book where there were less than 1,400 satellites in orbit, and that situation has changed. So obviously it was time for an update. For this audience, I did want to highlight one thing. Our initial handbook was translated into 3 of the UN languages. We hope to do more this time, so if you're interested in that, please do let me know. And those are still helpful, so while the numbers in that handbook are wildly inaccurate, there's still a lot of the same concepts that we've covered in the new book, if that's helpful. And so moving on to our second edition, as you can imagine, there's more actors, there's more investment, there's more satellites, there's more activities. And we have a lot of the same goals as the previous edition, but we really wanted to update the facts and figures, dive more into the trends that new actors might be observing and participating, and cover some of the activities that were not as prominent back in the 2015 to 2017 era. We've also welcomed in the modern age, and it's a lot more online friendly. So we have an online version, as well as the physical copy that I think many of you have taken advantage of at today's event. And the online version is full of hyperlinks. We do not claim to be the expert in every aspect of this topic. We want to point you towards other resources as well, resources that have informed us and that we think go into much more detail on specific topics in the book. So that's a big change for this time. You'll be able to click directly on the links, go see NASA's SmallSat handbook, or directly link to industry guidelines that have been published by various groups. And so just to give you a sense of what it covers before we move into the rest of today's program, we have 3 chapters. International framework. What are the laws? What do you need to know? What do countries sign up to? What is expected at that level, both in terms of what's decided and also what are some of the emerging or advanced issues that haven't been decided but are certainly being discussed. Second focus is really going to be on looking at what does national space policy and administration look like. With lots of case studies from around the world to give you a sense of how different countries have interpreted many of those international laws, how they enact space policy in their countries, etc. And then finally, we turn to the actual space environment itself. What does responsible operation look like? And again, this is not the final resource on this. Many of these issues are emerging and still being understood. We want to give everyone an overview of what we have seen and observed about that. So as I said, lots of revisions, but for those of you who are familiar with the first book, the general structure and content will be familiar. So I'm going to kind of go quickly through this. I don't want to take it up too much of your time, but to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we have added, everything from the Hague Code of Conduct to the dark and quiet skies is an emerging issue on Chapter 1, Chapter 2's case studies, all completely revised, really exciting to dive into what's happened in the last 6 years. And Chapter 3, as you can imagine, the world of commercial space and on-orbit operations for government and other actors is very, very different. So a lot on in-orbit servicing, on human spaceflight safety, which has taken a very different turn than it had quite a while ago. So very exciting there too. And then finally, availability. So this is a free resource. We put this out there because we think it's important that we all have a common understanding of these issues. Physical copies are available today, but we also are happy to give them out in other contexts. So feel free to reach out to me if you know a colleague who wants one or an event where we should distribute them. It's also completely free for download for that online edition as well. Oh, actually, I'll go back 1 second. I also just like to point this out. Feedback is welcome. We are a community-driven organization, and we are absolutely open to, one, did we make a mistake? But two, we'll be revising it again in a few years. So if you have thoughts on how this can be more useful of a resource to you as you engage with it, please do let us know. We keep an absolutely long-running log of that, and we'll be taking that into consideration for future editions. All right, so thank you so much for joining us here today. It's really exciting to partner with the Meridian Center, who shares many of the same goals that we have on an international front, coming at it from a slightly different perspective. So this has been really fun to organize, and it's great to see a full room, particularly on such a cold day. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back over to Frank for our first panel.
Thanks again, Crystal. Meridian, one of our biggest partners is the State Department, and we've had lots of conversations with the Office of Space Affairs within the department in the past year. And a lot of the diplomats that end up in that office are new to space as well. And they said the first book they get when they end up in the office, everybody gets a copy of the handbook. So it just demonstrates how important it really is. I'm pleased to be joined by 3 representatives from the Southern Hemisphere here. It's exciting. Those conversations don't happen enough here in Washington. But to my immediate left is Paulo Braga. Paulo's a career diplomat. He serves as a science and technology attaché at the Brazilian embassy. And he's previously served in Paraguay and in Argentina. And we both went to university in Sao Paulo, Brazil, for at least a little bit in my case, which is exciting. Next, we have Marta Major. Marta is with the New Zealand Space Agency, where she serves as Minister Counselor for Space, Science, and Innovation. Marta is an ideal panelist because she has worked with startups, she's worked with larger corporations, she's worked around the world, and I think she has really keen insight that will be helpful for today. And then Carlos Muscari, who I've gotten a chance to know a bit better the last couple of weeks, serves as the Economic and Commercial Section diplomat at the Argentinian Embassy here in Washington. He's also served in other positions both in Buenos Aires as well as in New Delhi. So the goal here is to get to lots of questions today. We want to give you a real insight into some of the things to think about when you are launching your space programs for your countries or as you are getting into the industry as a startup. And so what I want to start with, though, is just getting a sense of some of the different ways in which a country can look at the opportunity to get into. There's so many different pathways to get into the space sector. So the first question, briefly, would love from each of you to hear just a bit more about what is your country's strategy when it comes to space. So Paulo, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Meridian, for the invitation. As you said, it's a great opportunity to have 3 countries from the South here. We don't get it a lot here in DC. And it's an opportunity to portray our endeavors in the space. Brazil now, our agency is 30 years old. It was created in 1994. It was before a military endeavor, and then it became civilian. And since then, we are working hard to promote the science in the country, you know. Now the main plan that we have is the National Space Activities Program. It was launched in 2022. It goes to 2031, so it's roughly 10 years of programs with the intention to coordinate government, academia, civil society, and the industry to raise awareness to the society about the importance of the space program. And I think this is a key for us developing countries, how to convince or how to showcase to our society that space programs is important and they are important motor for the academia and for the industry, because everybody, when you think about space activities, is the astronaut landing on the moon. And when you come from a developing country, you have to showcase that's not only this, but space activities, the money we invest in space activities goes to different kinds of industry and brings different kinds of solutions to the society. So our strategic plan is based in bringing to the society, the Brazilian society, the solutions that they need with the technology developed in the country. International cooperation is an important factor in these regards, but for sure, as any other country, try to promote our industry as much as we can, and we are doing pretty good. I can share. We are very happy to cooperate with our colleagues from other countries as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I know. So much attention comes when Axiom sends up, launches, and there's folks from all different countries, which is exciting. But there's so many more ways to get into the industry besides just having your own astronaut in space. Exactly. Marta, could you share?
Sure. First of all, thank you also for the invite. It's great to be here at Meridian, and also thank you to the Secure World Foundation for the ongoing positive partnership. So New Zealand is actually a unique example of a space nation that was founded on commercial activities rather than a large institutional activity. We're probably best known for Sir Peter Beck, who founded Rocket Lab, deciding to launch from New Zealand. So the launch activities from New Zealand are what comes to mind when people think about New Zealand in space. I can assure you we have many, many more very interesting space activities than that. But just to say that was really the genesis of what really put us on the map, so to speak. From his desire to launch from New Zealand, we started negotiating the Technology Safeguard Agreement here with the US, the first of its kind. We entered into a memorandum of cooperation with the FAA to be able to have him launch from New Zealand. And then we also had to then create our space legislation and create our own space agency. And that only happened in 2017, so not that long ago. But from then, things happened very, very quickly, not only on the launch side, but more importantly, we put a lot of effort into international outreach. So we made sure, similar to our Brazilian colleagues, to really come in behind our academic and research sector and making sure that we help promote research partnerships into the commercial sector within New Zealand, but also internationally. So we have a very strong partnerships now with our German friends from DLR, of course here in the US with NASA, in Australia with the SmartSet Cooperative Center, and also with commercial businesses like you mentioned Axiom Space. We've had a couple of very interesting research partnerships with them. We also partnered up with the US not-for-profit, the Environmental Defense Fund, on the MethaneSat mission that monitors global methane emissions. So trying to look at it from all those aspects has been very, very important for us. Coming back into the more the government spectrum, the current government in New Zealand came into power about 18 months ago, and they appointed the first minister for space in New Zealand. So we never had that, but that was a recognition of the importance of the sector and how we really wanted to grow the sector for New Zealand. So last year we actually released the New Zealand Space and Advanced Aviation Strategy that sets to double the sector by 2030. And within that strategy, which is on our website, by the way, it kind of like sets out how we intend to do that. That's all around increasing our own sovereign space capabilities by having a national space mission. It talks about how we want to really foster more our own workforce, how we want to have a world-leading regulatory system, how we want to unlock international investment and trade, and really want to unlock and accelerate innovation across the board. And I think the other thing that's probably worthwhile mentioning as part of the strategy is that not only are we talking about how we want to advance and safeguard our own national security aspects, but we also want to continue to be a very strong voice on the international stage around the sustainable and peaceful use of space and making sure that those topics remain top of mind.
And I want to talk more about that in a little bit, but very comprehensive overall. Carlos?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here, first time in the Meridian. For Argentina, I mean, the core of our national space program is the CONAE, which is the National Commission in Space Activities. It's our national space agency. It was founded in 1960, and since then, Argentina has developed like our own infrastructure and also developed several satellites for communication, remote sensing, and also for scientific purposes. I would say that three main pillars of our strategy and the Argentina's approach to space and technological development. I mean, we develop satellites for our economic needs, right? And that's the second pillar, like scientific research for economic development, as Paulo mentioned earlier. Like we have aligned our industry to our national needs: agricultural monitoring, natural resource management, and disaster response. And I think that not only for our own development, but also for promoting that, and that's what we do at the embassy, at the trade promotion area, also to promote all the services that Argentina can export to the U.S. And I think the third pillar, and I know that the time is short, the third and main pillar, I think, is international cooperation, collaboration with other spacefaring nations is crucial. Like Argentina has partnered with the European Space Agency, with the Italian Space Agency, with NASA. In March, the third bilateral dialogue will take place here during the satellite week, and I think that's very important. And also at the regional level, I think we have a lot of partnership with Brazil and with a lot of Latin American countries. 4 years ago, the Latin American and Caribbean Space Agency was founded and still in early stages, but I think that those pillars are like the main pillars of our space strategy.
I want to maybe stick with you for a minute, and I know I've been coming to some of the gatherings around satellite the last couple of years that we've hosted at the embassy. I think we may be partnering this year, but I've had a chance to meet with some of the representatives from some of Argentina's satellite companies, and I think Argentina's satellite industry has had some good milestones, and I think satellites are certainly a way in which many countries are getting into the space industry. So would love maybe to share a bit more for countries that are looking to launch their own satellite. What are some best practices that you can share with that? Maybe highlight some of the stuff that
Sure.
in Argentina, but would love to hear more about what are some best practices, what are some smart steps?
Perfect, yeah. Well, as I mentioned in my first answer, like leveraging the satellite technology for key industries, I think that's one of the things that I would like to highlight. Like Argentina has tailored satellite technologies to the needs of specific industries, like such as agriculture, energy, oil, mining and oil. Those sectors are central to our economy, and we have created applications like satellite imaging for resource management, for environmental monitoring, And I think that it's important that, like, first, like, suggestion to new actors and new countries in our industries to align satellite core capabilities with key industries and with the specific market's demands. So it's important, I think, to align the industry to the national needs. Then, well, I would like to, of course, private sector engagement with the private sector. I mean, Argentina, or CONAE, has partnered with private companies, fostering innovation and expanding the reach of our satellite capabilities. And I think that, well, connected with this, encouraging entrepreneurial ecosystems. In Argentina, we have in Córdoba, in Bariloche, and Buenos Aires, this ecosystems, and it worked well. It worked really well, and I think that what we do, and in March, inside the satellite, we've been participating in the satellite fair for many years, and we support all the Argentine companies that come into the US, but also like the startups. So I think that the startups in Argentina are, because we have the big players like ARSAT, INVAP, but also the startups are playing a crucial role in our satellite industry, and what we are trying to do is, well, to support them, to also to be suppliers of the US companies, and that's what we are gonna do in the third bilateral dialogue in March. So those are like few features of what we do at the space at the satellite industry. I don't know if that is.
Thank you. So, Marta, getting back to some of the space sustainability aspects, we are at the age of space constellations. We know we have Starlink, that China is launching more and more all the time, Project Kuiper is coming on. We're only going to have more and more satellites in our skies going forward, which does make space sustainability increasingly important. And I know that New Zealand has put it out in the handbook, has really integrated space situational awareness and other areas into your policy, into your regulatory format. Could you share a bit more about why and how you focused on space sustainability as part of your approach?
I can do that. Well, first of all, again, thank you for using us as a case study. I'm very happy to see that. I guess again, it's an advantage, I guess, when you're a new space agency, or I would think that it's an advantage if you're setting up a new space agency, that you go out and find out what others have been doing, and you try to be cognizant of what others might not have done in the past, and learn from their, may I call it, mistakes or things that they have overlooked. And learn from it. So we had the advantage in 2017 when we set up the regulatory regime to really make sure that from the beginning we made sustainability a core element of our regulatory regime. And what that means is that for us it's incredibly important that we stick to our international obligations, that we register satellites that are being launched from New Zealand under international law. And we really are very clear around important topics like orbital debris mitigation plans that we require from players that want to come into New Zealand. When we look at all these topics, we're also then trying to make sure that we take advantage of what's already out there and use best practice that's out there, rather than coming in and kind of like coming up with a new system. So with respect to the orbital debris mitigation plans, for example, we do accept plans or regimes that more established or more experienced players like NASA or the European Space Agency have developed. And we think that's a really good way to enable international cooperation and being able to really help the players that are coming into your country to help with making it seamless from that point of view. But I do want to stress that for us, we take our responsibility incredibly seriously. We do monitor everything that's launched from New Zealand throughout their orbital lifetime. So it's not just a launch and then it's done. We really want to make sure that we continue with our obligation towards the rest of the world. Initially, we did not have the capability in-house. So what we ended up doing was we worked with a commercial company. Here, you will know this company being in the US, the company Leo Labs, and they helped us with that mandate, if you liked. And as we became more established, we were able to kind of like bring those capabilities in-house and build those capabilities in-house. So I think, you know, it's certainly a topic that's going to become more and more complex. So space traffic is challenging. It's only going to get more challenging. So working internationally together is incredibly important. And I do want to say that, you know, the work that is underway here in the US with TREX is an incredibly important part of helping with that as well.
Yeah, I think international space cooperation is key, no matter what actor you are joining. And I know you mentioned that's part of Brazil's program. And Brazil, I understand, was the first country within South America to sign the Artemis Accords. And a shout out to Finland, who I know is here, diplomat somewhere here in the back. Finland signed on Tuesday, the first country to sign under the new administration. But would love to hear a bit about Brazil leveraging international cooperation, perhaps in particular the Artemis Accords, and how you're using that as an opportunity to really launch a lot of your endeavors within the space sector.
Oh, sure, Frank. Yes, you're correct. We were the first Latin America country actually to join the Artemis Accord. We are happy to have our colleagues now with us from different countries joining the Artemis Accords as well. And since we have joined the Artemis Accord, I think it was 2021 if I'm not wrong, we start our homework at home to talk to our academia, to our industry and to different kind of government agencies to think about and how can we engage to the Artemis Accord specifically with technology and concrete objectives. So the Brazilian Space Agency is doing an effort and is hosting a lot of different workshops with different stakeholders back in Brazil to showcase the importance of Artemis and to try to understand how we can effectively engage and participate in the Artemis program's objectives. We have two very interesting results from this process. That Embrapa, that's our Center for Development for Agriculture, is developing new research on space agriculture, because we understand that we cannot deliver food so quickly to the moon, to the Mars, so we have to develop some kind of space agriculture. And since Brazil is an agricultural powerhouse, together with our colleagues from Argentina as well, and we have developed important knowledge on agriculture. We think that our contribution to the Artemis could be very, very good in this area. And also mining in the lunar superficie. We have ITA, that's our academia, it's our equivalent of the MIT, that's based in São Paulo. They are building satellites to monitor the lunar space and to understand the opportunities for mining there as well. So we are trying to promote what we have the best through the Artemis Accord and using the Artemis Accord as a motor for our development of our industry, our research academia.
That's great. I've also heard from some countries that signing the Artemis Accords was a way in which they could help their legislatures in their countries spur them to invest more in the space sector. So it really was a way to show folks in their country, give them a reason, give them a rationale to invest more in space. I think we're going to maybe move to some Q&A here. So if anybody has a question, maybe raise your hand. But first, I want to maybe just ask one of the, so I have 8 million questions here to ask. We won't have time for most of them, but I think one maybe rapid fire question I could ask is just, for a country looking to get into the space sector quickly, what is a way to sort of get up to speed? Is it joining, we're attending a big space conference like the IAC or a space symposium? Is it having some people attend Space University? What is one piece of advice that you have for a country that is looking at a way to bring themselves up to speed?
Yeah, nowadays you have the advantage of connectivity. You can engage in different ecosystems without leaving the country, actually, through internet communication. Back in the 60s, 70s, it was not possible. So we live in an area that a startup or someone or a government can fast engage in international discussion. For Brazil, what have worked, and a short brief testify was investing in education. I think it's a basic, it's some cliche, but it's what worked, like the investment in education when we established our MIT, that's called ITA in Brazil. It started our airplane industry, that came to be our airspace industry as well. So starting from investing in education and international cooperation, well, it cuts a lot of hard work to have cooperation, and that's the importance of Artemis as well, to learn from those who are in the forefront of technology.
Yeah, I was recently traveled to some other countries that are sort of pre-emerging spacefaring nations, and they were sort of talking almost like phase 5 or 6 of a program, and the group sort of their big takeaway was that they need to take a couple steps back and invest in that workforce capacity and development, and really focus in on education. And so I think that's one of the things that Meridian is focusing on with countries, is how can we invest in that workforce development, that capacity building. Marta?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, learning from other established space actors is incredibly helpful in making use of all the resources that are available. So the handbook is one, but there are also capacity capability building resources that COPIUS, so the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, is making available. So getting involved in those types of fora, we are, even though you might not necessarily think you're there yet, but just getting internationally involved and hearing what the challenges are and actually having a say in it is incredibly powerful as well, and you learn as you go. Certainly getting involved in Artemis, we were involved in the negotiation of the text of it, and at the time there were certainly other players that were more significantly involved in the Artemis program, but the Artemis text that is separate from the program, having a voice in those international discussions is incredibly important. And then with respect to these events that you mentioned, I mean, yes, they're useful to go and speak to other international players. The only thing I would say is I remember the first time I went to an IAC or a space symposium in 2017. I was absolutely overwhelmed. I had not appreciated how massive these events are. So I'd say yes, go, but do your homework first and have a plan and know who you want to talk to and what you need to get out of it.
Carlos, if I may, maybe I'll just jump to a question and give maybe you the first chance at answering it. Did anybody have a question for our panel? Right up here? I think there would be a microphone coming your way.
Good morning, and thank you very much. My question is, three of you are from the Global South, and as space now is entering a new era and more extensive presence for the private sector, and more people are launching and everything, what is the most important concern as Global South countries you have about space? And what are the policies that you would like to see being enacted or implemented as we go forward? Thank you.
Carlos? Or anyone, somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I'm not an expert. About the defense. I don't know if your question. Is it working? I think you said about the concerns that we have about the. Well, it's not my expertise because I come from fake promotion. But what I could say is like I would take it from the positive side. Like we're here in this panel to share our best practices and share some suggestions to new actors. and I think that new actors are taking part in the space, in the outer space. So what I think we can do is to foster the international cooperation with not only with the new nations, but also with the private sector. So something that I always recommend is to, and that's what the Argentina policy right now is, to engage with the private sector, to foster investments in Argentina, to do public-private partnerships. So, and now is easy, like the participation of the private sector in the outer space has been increasingly. It took part increasingly, and I think that now for new actors, for new nations, it's easier to engage with them, because starting in this industry, in this sector, is hard because it's expensive, it's complex. So I think that those concerns that you mentioned that may have the new nations throughout the engagement with the private sector and throughout the governments, because governments we have a key role to support our industries, to support our companies, and I think both governments and private sector, I think, are crucial for new actors. And from I don't know if you from the south. We're far, and in this sector, like USA, Europe, or like New Zealand are the big players.
I don't know if it's just a global south thing, but another area that I've heard is just the dark and quiet skies. And I think it might have been Uruguay, but they've made great contributions to advancing that in some different bodies. But I think the big focus in on concerns around the constellations and what that might mean with the light pollution, I think that's a key concern that I've heard as well. But do either of you have another?
Yeah, like Argentina, we see very positively the private sector, the participation. It's changed the way we did things, because it was before a government relation, now it's a government-private sector relation. It comes with good things and challenges as well. Some of the service that we need for satellites, like Earth observation, climate change, maybe sometimes not interesting for the private sector, so we still have to develop our capabilities to provide the needs of our population. But also for new emerging nations, maybe it would be more challenging because they have the protection, or like the protection of government relation to put them in the scenario. Now they have to convince the private sector they are interested partner as well. In Brazil, we have some good examples of partnership. Now our launch center in Alcântara is being developed by a South Korean private sector company that's launching their satellites from there. So we see opportunities, but as I said, it's a new environment that we have to keep up because it's very fast.
Marta, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I agree with what my fellow panelists have said, and I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. From a museum perspective, and I mentioned this earlier, it's enshrined in our national strategy as well. We want to be a player that is leads by example and stands for, we want to help promote the responsible use of using space peacefully and sustainably, and all we can do is, as I said, lead by example and make use in international fora, and that those discussion points get reiterated as well, and make use of all the international fora that are available to us on the international law front as well.
And those of us in the space sector know that New Zealand's done a great job of that. But so thank you, all three of you. I think that's all the time we have. And so next, I'm excited to welcome up our next
panel, and I believe that Victoria Sampson will make the introductions, but just want to mention that, of course, Victoria is a space sustainability expert, visionary leader, and just so privileged that she can be here to moderate this next conversation. So, Victoria, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Sampson. I'm the Chief Director of Space Security and Stability for the Secure World Foundation. Delighted to be here. Thank you, Meridian, for hosting this event with us. And really excited about this panel. And when we're talking about new actors in space, obviously the commercial sector is a huge part of that. And these two companies represented here are really doing interesting things, novel activities in space. And they've been around for a couple years, so they're new enough to have gone through some of the new things, but been around long enough to share some lessons learned, hopefully. So to my left, I have Matt Linton, who's the Chief Legal Officer of True Anomaly. And then we have Jason Malari, who's the VP and General Manager of Missions Systems, right?
No, yeah.
At Umbra Space.
Close enough.
God help me.
Doesn't
if I
really
get a
matter.
wrong. Yeah, exactly. This is DC. It's a terrible thing to do. And so what I wanted them to do is just kind of start off with some initial opening remarks, talking a little bit about their companies, their backgrounds, why they started what they're doing, and then going into, what sort of obstacles have they come across, what hard lessons learned, that sort of thing. And so, Matt, maybe you want to start.
Are you all able to hear me okay with the microphone? Okay, great. Truly honored to be here. Thank you for the invite, Meridian and Secure World Foundation. Victoria, thank you. This is just delightful. Let me tell you a little bit about True Anomaly. We were founded about 3 years ago by ex-Space Force veterans who were really tasked with some of the early work on behalf of the U.S. Space Force to think through both the doctrinal type response to the space domain and the threats that may lie therein, but also the technological response and the solutions that were going to be needed in the years ahead. And so the company was really founded at its core with a mission for space security and sustainability. And we don't believe that you can have sustainability without security. And our focus then has come with a full stack solution, as we call it, in both a satellite platform that we have called Jackal, as well as our software system called Mosaic for controlling Jackal, but also ingesting all of the kind of space domain awareness data and information necessary to safely command and control spacecraft that would be engaged in a variety of missions. Ours right now are focused on really in-space imagery, reconnaissance, and characterization to provide critical information back to the U.S. and our allies. And I say and our allies very expansively because we believe that this is truly an international project and look forward to talking a little more about the challenges you face as just a little company trying to do some things in an environment where you have this enormous responsibility that really spans the world.
Great. Thanks, Victoria. Frank, thanks for having me here. It's a privilege, and good morning to you all. Again, my name is Jason Malaire. I'm with a company called Umbra. We're a California-based company. Started about 10 years ago, 2015, in beautiful Central Coast, California, Santa Barbara, where we manufacture our spacecraft right downtown, right on State Street. So if you're ever out that way, feel free to look us up. The company was founded on the basic premise that we had gotten to the point where, specifically for national security, specifically for using space to protect borders and then project peace globally, that we got to the point where the technology was far more available, the knowledge was far more accessible than how we were doing it as a country, and that we really could simplify, we really could decrease the cost, increase the affordability. We could actually do it better, faster, and cheaper. And so our founders embarked on that in their garages, as any good founding story starts, in their garages in small little offices and flying test payloads on airplanes and being very entrepreneurial. And they demonstrated that, in fact, they could do what has typically been billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so with that hypothesis and a commitment to that, they've raised over $100 million over the last 10 years to grow a staff of 140, 150 folks between West Coast and East Coast. And we've launched 10 satellites in those intervening 10 years. And we do, in fact, operate that constellation in helping civil and defense customers in the U.S., as well as across the globe, our partners and allies, in what we call synthetic aperture radar imaging. So when you think of a traditional imaging system, like maybe a Maxar or like a Hubble space scope that has an optical sensor, this uses radio waves, and so it can see at night, and it has some other features. But that's what we do. Do you want me to talk about some of the challenges now? Yeah. And so the three things I wanted to share with this crowd is that we have seen and are continuing to work through classification or overclassification, regulatory environment, and then specifically export. So you kind of back to that founding story for Umbra, part of the reason why the conviction was so great was that really for the U.S., we had figured out how to do really incredible things from space and in the space race. And as we look to use that for, again, protecting borders and projecting peace, we started to, out of a sense of loyalty and protectionism and kind of overabundance of caution, really started to classify a lot of the technology. And frankly, I think we overdid it. And so what happened was things that were encroaching on physics, sort of basic ways to do things, were kind of stuck in the closet, as it were. And so we had to very slowly, kind of very carefully and obviously lawfully, kind of work through that and make sure that we were bringing that technology into the commercial space where we could use it lawfully. And so that's one thing, as for your countries as you're working through, or the new actors as you're working through this, very, very carefully balancing the need to protect national security, protect your interests, protect your people, with also making sure that you don't do it to the point where you're actually working against your own industrial base. Second is regulation. So for us specifically, commercial remote sensing licensing is sort of part of how we do our part for the Artemis Accords and the Outer Space Treaty, registering our spacecraft, things like that. And we have some fairly specific ways we're regulated. I won't walk you through that. And sometimes when those you put an application and you make a request and it starts plinkoing through the system, it gets stuck sometimes. And sometimes, going back to thing one, gets stuck behind closed doors. And so, you need a clearance. You need to find a way to kind of get in and have that conversation. Wait, why did it get stuck? What are we trying to protect here? All right, let's think through this. Let's make sure that we're not limiting ourselves. We think we're protecting ourselves, but we're actually doing damage to ourselves as a country. And the second is FCC, so our transmissions. As a RF imaging company, we transmit a lot. That's how we do our mission. And so we have to work very carefully to make sure we're being responsible with the spectrum, which is obviously a diminishing resource in the world. And so that also can be a little bit Byzantine. And the third is export. This is kind of a U.S., obviously leads the charge on this. It makes, as a U.S. company, it actually does make it really hard to do business internationally. The export laws are very important, but as you were thinking about that, as other countries are thinking about that, how you protect your domestic, how you think about, hey, if I give this technology to this partner today, are they a partner tomorrow? It's a very difficult challenge, but just know that puts a tremendous burden on your industrial base. It's a lot of extra effort, and it really puts a little bit of it. The technology has to be amazing to kind of overcome that barrier. And so far, we have that going for us from the U.S., and so it's working, but it's very, very challenging. So something to be careful of.
Thank you. How about you, Matt? What have you guys learned?
Well, I'll second sort of all of the above. We face very similar challenges, right? And you'll hear this a lot from some of the new stage space companies that these are the issues, overclassification, you name it. I'm going to take a slightly different angle in the sense of what do you want to see? There you go. What do you want to see as a nation of your entrepreneurial base, right, for the space environment? And obviously as a company with a national security focus, we have to think through all the same things here at True Anomaly as my colleague here mentioned. And that requires people wearing suits and going to Washington and having meetings and making sure that you're getting the right kind of people to agree. That's not a way to encourage innovation. Right? If you really want the kind of future for your nation, for your people, you want the 17-year-old to be able to sit down at a computer and think about the next great solution to a space problem, and to be able to do it with the right information that hasn't been kept behind closed doors, to be able to do it without thinking, well, do I need a Washington strategy? Like, that's crazy, right? And so if you're setting up your nation for success and true innovation, I think, that there are all sorts of issues with the way in which the tech industry has developed, right? But that being said, if you look at the companies that are leading the world today, most of them were started in a garage. Most of them were started by somebody that was naive enough to think that they could do something insane. It's really hard to do that for space, right? And there's accessibility issues as well. But so my view is, like, from the bottom-up base approach, how do you build an environment that enables that kind of free-thinking innovation among our youngest folks that can think about it in the context of exploration and not necessarily the negative context of defense. We cannot have exploration without the defense and the national security apparatus. But part of the problem as well is just the money, right? So it's extremely expensive to build stuff that goes to space. Where do you get the money? Well, it tends to be the money comes from the defense side, because that's where the resources are provided. So the other side here is, while defense must be 100% funded appropriately, we should not lose sight, and other nations should not lose sight of the critical need for capital in the non-defense arena. We are a venture-backed company. I think we're going to talk about that in a bit, right? So we're able to raise money and develop the solutions that we're developing at private expense because there's a big customer, the United States Department of Defense, on the other side. And yes, NASA has programs as well. But to the extent that we can have more money available or more potential demand signal on the more scientific side of things, I think all the better, because that also builds that picture, that positive picture for our children of what can they build next that will help really redefine our world.
Thank you. Really interesting stuff. We're going to have time for some questions from the audience, but I have a couple things I want to go over really quickly, responses from you guys. Jason, let's talk applications. Given that a lot of countries use space for disaster management response, let's talk about the role SAR data can play in that sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely. SAR, again, so synthetic aperture radar, it's kind of a mouthful, a little bit confusing. When you think of SAR, think of BYOL, bring your own light. Usually a camera, like the cameras walking around here today, you open the shutter, light bounces off the object, it comes and it hits the, used to be film, or the detector makes an image. For us, there's no light required, so we come and we illuminate with RF energy, like would come out of a cell phone, and it bounces energy off the ground, it comes back, the system receives it, and you can create actual imagery, and actually a whole lot more than just imagery with that. The reason that's important is disasters typically happen like fires that create smoke, like storms that have clouds, and of course, half the time it's dark. And so it's actually pretty inconvenient if you are only able to look optically with things that, you're imaging with light, it becomes very difficult. And so a complete, comprehensive solution certainly has eyes in the sky, traditional imagers, but we really do need to use radar technology to make sure that all weather, day and night, that you have coverage. The California fires is a very sad example, a recent example. Despite the smoke, despite night, and despite the weather, you can actually, peer through all of that and see, and it's very tragic, but you can actually see the destroyed buildings and destroyed homes. They actually show up very clearly. And so from a certainly disaster response, and then even into insurance adjusting, economic impact, things like that, it's becomes very easy to monitor that and to assess that.
Thank you. Matt, so talking about venture capital, how has that played a role in the expansion of your company? And how do you balance that sector's interest in a fast return versus military acquisition, which historically has gone at a fairly slow pace?
We are a venture-backed company. Our company exists because of U.S. venture capital firms that were willing to take a risk. And there's a beauty in that in some way, right? People that are willing to bring together large amounts of capital and spend it in the hopes that there will be that fee of the customer. And I think one of the things that is interesting is, while venture capital firms have certain horizons in which they need to show returns, right? The right firms are truly thinking in a long-term way, how they're building sort of the next great generation of an industrial base. And we're very fortunate to work with some of those firms. They understand, if you educate your investors properly, they understand that if your largest customer is the United States government, it ain't going to be easy or fast, right? And so, part of this is just an ability to talk informatively with those investors, explain the kinds of things like the acquisition cycle, and also, frankly, build the strategy like we have attempted to do of helping to nudge and move and drag, our friends in the government in the right way to streamline some of those acquisition processes. And we've got a lot of work to do. You'll hear about this from plenty of people all over DC, right? There are mechanisms in existing law, things like other transactions authority contracts, and that can streamline some of the traditional federal acquisition process. I think we actually are fortunate as a company, though, that we really believe, and we believe we have the support of our investors, that if we build the right thing, we know the customer is there, both at the U.S. government and internationally. We got to get past some of those export control problems. We got to get past some of the overclassification problems. I do think that there's a significant element of the U.S. venture capital industry that understands the complexities, that understands the timeline is not necessarily as fast as if you're starting a random app company. And they're doing it. They're doing it because they actually believe in why it's important as well.
Thank you. I know we're getting near the end, but we have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience. Any questions? In the back. You can identify yourself and your affiliation, please.
Yeah, Madeline Chang with the Satellite Industry Association. And, well, thanks for sharing. And I'm curious, since you're both startups that were founded within the past 10 years, what you would say is the biggest change in the startup ecosystem from then versus now? So in the regulatory environment or in the funding environment? Thanks.
I can give two anecdotes. One is launch has continued to become more and more accessible, and that's been a massive game changer really for the whole world. Shout out certainly to Rocket Lab and Sir Peter Beck, but really SpaceX has really changed the game. So that's one huge thing, not regulatory, but that's a big unlock. And then I think for us specifically, I mentioned earlier I wasn't going to mention the specifics of our license just because it's kind of esoteric, but we're limited on resolution. We still are limited on resolution, and that limit has actually increased substantially to the point where we were able to, the licensing kind of exceeds the technology, or at least is equally matched the technology, so we really can sell lawfully, kind of unencumbered from a remote sensing licensing perspective.
Quick comment on, particularly the regulatory environment. I was hired to the company to help try to solve some of the early problems with specific to non-Earth imagery capabilities, like our company focuses on. There's been really significant change in that arena in the last 5 years. There were some changes in the NOAA law that applies. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration regulates remote sensing and non-Earth imagery. They have worked quite frankly in a remarkable way to streamline the way in which they authorize the kind of work we do. FCC is also doing their level best with the legacy and inertia of a very old agency. And so, these things that make it possible. Our company may not have been possible even 5 years ago. And that was largely because of the regulatory environment.
Thank you. I think we're about to get the hook, so just really quickly, 30 seconds. If you guys could give one recommendation to countries that are looking to develop their commercial sector, what would that be?
While you're thinking, I'll go real quick. I actually have two, sorry. First is, I mentioned sort of the Byzantine regulatory environments that can be created, especially when there's decade or centuries old organizations. But as you're putting regulations in place, which you have to do, make sure you're thinking about making it as centralized, as simple as possible, as few touch points as possible, and transparency, so that your founders and their investors feel maximally confident that, yep, we got to hit these wickets, but we know what they are, and we know what's going on, and the rug's not about to be pulled out from underneath us. So transparency. And the second is don't be afraid to fail. Failing's good. It means you're learning. So fail early, fail often.
And hopefully this doesn't come out like a cliche, but it really starts with your children and your next generation. If you're not imbuing a sense of awe and wonder in your next generation about what's possible for space, and you're not teaching them the kind of science and technology skills that they need to be the innovators of the future, then they're going to go on and do other things. And you won't have that amazing sense of innovation and people willing to put in the time to develop something new if they never had the understanding or the belief that they could even do it. It's entirely possible for kids to come up and young people to come up with solutions. They don't need $1 billion and they don't need a government behind them. They just need the right encouragement and skills and training. And I think we need to do a much better job of that in the United States as well.
Good notes, Anton. Well, please join me in thanking this panel for a fascinating discussion. And with that, I'm turning the mic back over to my colleague, Krista.
All right, this will be quick, don't worry. I just want to thank the Meridian Center for hosting us. We see a lot of synergies between what we're trying to do with this handbook and our other space sustainability activities and the great work being done here. I want to thank our audience for your time. We hope this, for those of you who are new to either of our organizations on either side, we hope this is the beginning of a fruitful set of partnerships for both organizations that really look to the community to work with us. So please, if you don't know one or both of us, reach out, let us know. You'll certainly be hearing from us, I promise. I did also want to thank our speakers, both this panel and our previous panel, for their incredible insights. This isn't a simple topic. Developing these activities, whether from a national perspective, as a company or as an academic, et cetera, is a complex topic, and I really appreciate their thoughtfulness today in highlighting some of the issues that we touch on in the handbook and that then go beyond that. So thank you for that. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention this is one of many space sustainability events that Secure World handles and manages and works with a variety of groups on. And I will give you all a bit of a sneak preview of a big announcement that's coming very soon in the next few weeks. We will be announcing the location of our next Summit for Space Sustainability, which is our flagship event. We move it around the world. It's not the same event every year, so it's not the kind, we don't make money off of it. So it's the kind of thing where we really invite professionals such as yourself to offer insights on really what is next with space sustainability. What are we succeeding at? What are we failing at? What do we need to change, et cetera. And so that will be next October, and it will be in a European country. I can't say which one just yet. But please do